Hi, my name's Richard and I'm so glad that you're here today. We are going to carry on our series on understanding audiences. This is the second episode. Previously we looked at why we need to define our audiences to solve the particular business challenges that we're facing and how we do that. This particular episode in our series is going to look specifically at how do we research our audiences so that we can create the insights that we need to then create the strategy that we want to. If you don't have a clear understanding of who your audience is as an organisation and how to reach them, how to talk to them, how to connect with them, you're really going to struggle as a company. Maybe you're an agency helping brands to solve these challenges for your clients. Maybe you're a brand manager or a director or owner of a particular brand and you want to better understand how to connect with your audiences so that you can really convert them into lifelong advocates of your company. Then this really is for you. It's an essential topic and I want to today look at how we can better understand our audiences through research. So why don't you stick around. So, in the previous episode, we looked at the importance of placing your audience at the centre of everything that you do when building a brand. We also looked at how every business challenge generally presents itself financially initially, but at its core really is a human challenge. In this episode, we're going to look at some of the tools to help you understand how to build research methodologies to help us better understand your audience so that we can talk to them. So this is really where research comes in. If you think about research in some sort of academic sense, then I'm afraid this really isn't for you. Because really what we're doing is talking to people. We're trying to understand who your customers are, what they need, what they're about, what their preferences are. And gradually, as with human relationships, unless you have that connection and unless you talk to them, you become more and more estranged. And the same is very true for companies, and that's the usefulness, especially of person-to-person, first-hand research. So, the second key issue why research is so important is because we are pretty biased as people. We come from our own paradigm, our own ideology, and it's so important to build a level of empathy within our relationship with our customers. So to understand our audience's needs, we need to look objectively, take a step back and receive their feedback. This is sometimes when it's actually quite useful to get a third-party organisation to kind of come in because it's very hard to be objective when it's your baby brand on the line and it's hard to see clearly some of the negative perceptions that people might have and be able to address them as they are. Now, there are two main categories in research. Firstly, you have primary research and then you have secondary research. Now, primary research is really to do with the kind of work or research that you might conduct directly with your subject that's relating directly to the questions you're looking to answer with your research. For example, if you were to conduct a series of in-depth interviews, the data that you gathered would be considered primary. It's unique and it's bespoke to your specific research needs. The next type of research that you'll come across is secondary research. Whereas primary research is one-to-one, it's based upon the needs of the particular research question that you're looking to answer. Secondary research is data that you might gather that could be incredibly useful, but isn't necessarily conducted for the purpose of that research with your research subject. But very useful. Sometimes analyst reports like engaging companies such as Mintel or Forrester, so they can provide you with trend analyses of your market, for example, are critical when building out a strategy. So useful though it isn't primary research, it's secondary research. So when researching your audiences, the two critical types of research that you'll need to conduct are both qualitative and quantitative. Now, qualitative is the first type of research, and it is the type of research that really puts you in a relational context with your audience. This empathetic listening kind of study allows you to better understand your audience, their emotions, their needs and their wants. It's a way of empathizing with them, understanding them, and it's the most critical way for gaining actual insights into human behavior. Quantitative research, on the other hand, is much more about the kind of number crunching side of research, and it sits alongside primary qualitative research beautifully. You really need the two to kind of understand the human condition and gather insights. If you're to choose one or the other, qualitative is the most useful when it comes to communications and understanding humans, but quantitative can give you some really critical insights. And secondarily, it provides you with data, statistics, so on and so forth, in a way that qualitative research doesn't. Think of surveys, think of data gathering type methods. That is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about qualitative research. Firstly, there's often a challenge I find in clients being willing to engage in the type of research that I'm talking about to kind of gather those insights around particular campaigns. You really have to weigh the type of work with the research need. As a result, you potentially can do work that doesn't require research, and you can maybe look for secondary sources to help inform your decisions and create strategy from, some data points that are going to be really useful for you. But there are particular needs, especially when it comes to rebranding or brand strategy work, that actually having a more robust research methodology is really going to serve the process well. Sometimes you have to set expectations with clients that things just take a little bit of time to be able to do the work well. There are many methods out there that you can use today that are available to us that give you real-time insights to particular questions that you're looking for. Certain apps that you can use, for example, that will enable you to send questions to a sample database to get them to answer real quick. They're great and they have a place. But often the research that we're talking about here doesn't necessarily always sit at home. It's important to remember the need for us as consultants or agencies to think through actually the pressure that clients are under sometimes. Being a CMO is probably recognised as being one of the most challenging and fast turn jobs that there is, simply because of how many broad roles and responsibilities that they need to cover, but also dealing, like we talked about earlier on in the previous episode, in this dark art of market science work. And I think that it's important to remember that when talking through some of these decisions with clients. So bearing that in mind, knowing that we need to empathise with their clients, knowing that they have a particularly hard job and need to justify the decisions that they have to make, we can help support that with research at times, and we can help support them in the process. Additionally, it's also true sometimes that agencies don't want to do the research work. They don't want to engage in more long form research methodologies that enable them to gather the insights to make the work better. Maybe they don't believe that it will actually make the work better. And so that's also a mindset challenge that needs to be addressed. And in many instances, there is this sense of experience that can be applied to many different projects that you take on as an agency. So the first issue that you tend to face is that there really is a misunderstanding of the value of this type of work. One issue is twofold. Agencies are not typically seen as strategic business partners. They're the ones with the crayons, for example. They're the ones that are doing the nice colours and nice drawings, all that kind of stuff. And they really don't or aren't seen or perceived as having the kind of business intelligence and awareness of what needs to be done for the organisation. And so they get categorised as not being able to have those sort of boardroom conversations that are so critical to how you create insights and how that then drives brand and how that then connects to business success. Additionally, there's often a truism that a standard creative arts education never really teaches business adequately. And so these challenges tend to combine to sort of give this perception of agencies that doesn't really give them the strategic chair at the table that they possibly should do with at times. Part of the value that then gets provided is this critical piece around the voice of the consumer. Now, we've looked at business challenges. We've looked at why it's so important to establish the voice of the consumer within the organisation to solve business challenges that maybe manifest themselves financially but have a human behind them. Unless you bring that voice into the decision-making process, it's a hiding to nothing really, because you're kind of guessing. You need that data, you need that understanding, and that's a really critical point when it comes to justifying this type of work and then building the sort of relationship as an agency with a client that they see the value in that work and they see the role that you provide in offering insights that can actually change the course of the business. It becomes about visual expression. It becomes about those crayons at times, dare I say, that we get categorized in, and it becomes even harder for organizations to succeed and both parties lose out. Throughout my career, I've used several different ways to explain the value of research-led strategy projects to clients. I think that they're helpful tools to bear in mind as metaphors, for example, when talking to clients, so that you can kind of help them to understand in a discussion around the value of some of this work. They're kind of back of napkin type illustrations that will be conversation starters to unveil some truths about this type of work. So the first illustration I'd suggest you use is that of the iceberg. And so what you want to do when you grab your napkin is simply draw a triangle, and then you're going to draw that water line, and then the smaller part peeking out the top of the water line, and then the mass obviously being underneath the water. And so what we want to do in this illustration is explain through the simple illustration that the customer obviously sees what sticks out of the water. They see the peak of the iceberg. That's their experience, right? But the organisation is the one that knows the wealth of work that goes on underneath the surface to inform that experience, right? The research that you need to do, the positioning that you need to do, the brand platform that you need to build, the empathetic approach to an agile response to clients and customers that helps you to engage with them on an ongoing basis, okay? So that's the first one, the idea that actually underneath the surface of the water, you have this critical element of research that informs your brand strategy, that then informs the actual experience you provide. So the second illustration that I'd suggest that you think about using is this idea of a plumb line. So in the past, I've drawn a plumb line on a piece of paper, simple line with, the weighted anchor at the bottom. And at the base of this piece of paper, I'll illustrate how all of the activities that go on within your organisation have to follow this simple plumb line of the audience and the brand. Being a brand-led organisation means having that ongoing connective relationship with your audience. And the plumb line of understanding that comes from research really defines which activities you should pursue and which ones don't. It speaks of efficiency, it speaks of effectiveness. Okay? So the third one that I would suggest you use is a game of chess. Now you can draw out a checkerboard, not sure how you'd want to illustrate this, but the principle being that after 4 moves in chess, there's a potential 288 billion potential moves. How, as an organisation, do you suggest having an ongoing strategic direction without the research that informs what the audience cares about? Unless you have research in place, robust research in place that enables you as an organisation to connect with your audience, understand what they need and make decisions based upon that, then there's going to be some challenges in your strategy and potential waste of resources in misdirection of your organisation. So chess is a great way of illustrating how having that research, knowing what audience insights you need to move with, are the ones that are going to be able to help you make good decisions for your organisation. Lastly is this idea of a map. Now, in this illustration, you want to grab that piece of paper, toilet paper, whatever it is, notebook, and then just draw a simple picture of a map, simply putting a cross where one person would be, which represents the company or the company's leadership. And then you draw another cross on the map, which represents the customers, and then potentially a third one, which represents the internal part of your organisation or the team. Now, unless you have research that enables you to understand the second and the third cross, the external audience and your internal team, How as an organisation will you lead them in a specific direction that will help you mutually get to the same place? It's great if you've got these great ideas, but unless you understand perceptions that potentially could be holding you back from being able to effectively lead that organisation or your customers in the direction that you want them to, you really are going to be missing out. So those are 4 key illustrations that I've used in the past. They're simple ways of just being able to talk to clients and to be able to explain the value to the actual business about how research can then impact the business challenges that you're facing and resolve them. Okay? So now that we've looked at the different types of research and why and how we justify, doing actual research with clients, we've got to ask ourselves, how do we scope the research? How do you start by, figuring out who you should be talking to and how many and what you can justify? And you really want to have conversations with clients that really center around this idea of risk. How much risk are they willing to take on as a result of a particular project, for example? The more research that you get and the more insights that you're able to gather, the less spikes you'll have within the data. So for example, if you were to talk to 20 people, for example, as opposed to 40 people, the amount of times that maybe a particular theme would come up would be equal in both, or the balance might be equal in both, but you'll have more spikes in the smaller quantity of research. And so it gives you, as an agency or as a brand looking to understand your audiences, it gives you the insights to be able to make more confident decisions based upon quantity. So it's really a matter of what risk are you willing to take on as part of the project and the decisions that you need to make as a result. And so the other part of that is, what's the outcome, right? Depending upon the scale of the project and what challenge it is that you're looking to resolve, you need to think through what the value of that particular work is to your client or to you as a brand leader. So being that you could be talking about for example, a complete rebrand. Maybe you're an international organisation that needs to do an enterprise rebrand, and there's a great deal of risk potentially associated with that to get it wrong, or to not be optimised in the way that could make exponential benefit to you. Spending a little bit more time, spending a little bit more consideration around the research phase will be really important. If it's a smaller project, maybe it's an internal engagement piece, you need some insights into some of the challenges as to why people aren't acting in a certain way or don't understand certain aspects of you as a company. The cost might not necessarily be quite as high if you don't get it right. So my suggestion would be to really think through, what is the value of the project? How much risk are you willing to take on as part of its outcome? Okay, so if you're thinking about creating a research methodology and you're thinking through numbers and scope of what would be a right number of people to interview, what would be a reasonable number of hours to spend on this work, we need to think about that topic of risk, but more to the point, understanding what's going to represent the audience. If you're thinking of an international brand that has multiple audiences across multiple geographies, you need to have each of those geographies and you need to have each of those audience groups represented fully, really, to remove risk or as best as you can. So to gather research from multiple audiences could require interviewing or having focus groups on multiple continents. Maybe it's a startup. This is where it also is a challenge. You as a startup, for example, might want to consider doing a much smaller sample to test ideas and to create more of an understanding of your audiences in the first place, rather than dealing with a larger organisation, say for example, that has embedded perceptions about who they are and needs to understand those perceptions so they can adjust them. Without understanding the difference of types of brands that we're working with and what is an appropriate approach to research for each one, we can misdirect clients and we can waste unnecessary resources, and on the kind of flip side of that, not do enough create bad and unhealthy insights that are just jam-packed with assumptions. And we need to make sure that we're not doing that either. So you need to kind of think about that question. How am I representing the audiences adequately in the research program that I'm suggesting to my clients or doing for myself? So one thing that I'd really like to address in this conversation is really just to talk about the fact that actually when we're thinking about agencies and how we execute creative, sometimes there can be this disconnect between the value and the purpose of research. It's often the case that research tends to take over the creative process for the client, where they need justification for decisions that they're making, rather than actually using the research to create insights to create better creative. That is where often we find a challenge, and that is why sometimes there's a reluctance from a creative team or a creative lead to be able to engage in the research process, simply because creativity is a very intuitive process, it's a very intelligent process, it's this idea of creating new, but it's heavily connected with this idea of creating new, but also being brave in doing so, creating leaps that actually an insight that then drives creative work can transform the strength of a brand and the relationship that it has with its audience. Now, you can kind of see that the tension is there. The reason that research is useful in that process is, as we've mentioned, it's about creating insights. It's about creating a richer understanding with audiences and not basing, quite costly decisions at times, especially for clients, on intuition, where that intuition might very well be right and often is the case. The research really provides the client at times with the flexibility to be able to then go and make good decisions based off that research. So it's more about research prior to creative, to set the creative up, and then having a framework for assessment to be able to then judge what is good creative and what is off based upon audience insights. So hopefully that kind of clears up that topic, because it is an important topic to address. So that's all I have for you today on looking at researching your audience. We've talked about a basic structure of the main categories of research that you need to be aware of when you're thinking about creating an approach for researching your audience. But more importantly, we've looked at some of the challenges that agencies have and clients have, and then some of the underlying principles that will help guide your direction. If you found any of the categories of research to be particularly helpful, or would like to have any further reading on how to conduct research, if you just click below in the comments, you'll find a link that will take you to a place where I've provided you with sort of a downloadable PDF that hopefully will give you some more insight there. It's been great to talk to you. Thank you for your time. I hope you found this useful. It's a really chunky subject, and I want you to steer these waters really well. Join me next time where we'll be talking further about understanding audiences, and I can't wait to see you. Thanks very much. Bye.